and welcome to our latest edition of What Makes the Difference. And today we are delighted to have our friend Gwyneth. And Gwyneth is the daughter of a military family, and she's going to talk about her experiences of service life and transition through her school into civ history, as it were.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Gwyneth. Because I think quite often, sometimes there's an awful lot of conversations about life in the military from the actual service leaver or the person who is enlisted. But there's a very different experience for people that are born into the military, are children of a military family, or marry into the military. And we wanted to reflect that as well. So thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks for inviting me, Ali and Rich. So thank you. To give you a bit of context, I was born in Germany in a place called Hanover. My father was in the army for over 20 years, and we moved around with him. So just every 2 years, a typical nucleus family within the forces. What that typically meant was going out in the evening to the NAFI in the camp in Germany, or going to Brownies, having our little community there, and in the day, obviously education, either in an army school, what I call an army school, or in a civvy school, depending on where we were living.
So I take it you were both based mostly in Germany all that time?
Mostly. We did spend a lot of time in northern England as well, northeast of England, a bit of both, in Wiltshire, that I can recall. And of course, I was young, very young. We were in northern, what was West Germany back in the day, northern Germany, and then back down to Dortmund and places like that. Yeah.
So there's an awful lot of conversations that go on about the experience of the military child while they're in the military, and the challenges sometimes of frequent moves and of, the changing friendship circles. But there's not so much that talks about the journey when that child also leaves the military, because when a service leaver exits the military, then so does their family, unless they still have a serving member within one of the with the other partner. And that was really of interest to us, Gwyneth, in terms of what the impact of that was for you as well, because you've lived that life as the military child, but you've also lived that life as the child leaving the military community too.
Well, it was, without sugarcoating it, it was a massive impact. I was a teenager. I was very aware. When I was young, 0 to maybe 7 or 8, kind of it was typical, moving around and things like that. But when we got to my teenage years, of course, I was aware of Dad going off wherever he was going off to serve the country. And then when we were transitioning, and he was transitioning, more to the point, out of the forces, that was a massive impact for my family. Previous to that, just before him transitioning, my brother was a lot older than me, and he went to live with my grandparents because we were living in Germany. So he had to make a choice very early on in life, at the age of 16, whether he wanted to stay within Germany or go back to home, inverted commas. And he had made that choice to go back home and get a job there. So that was the first transition in my big bubbling burst, if you like. And then the second one was my father leaving. So what that meant to the family was a huge amounts of stress. I've heard on the podcast around people who have housing issues, financial issues, settling down issues, really with very little support. And that was something that I experienced and saw through the eyes of a teenager. Real stressful. It was a real pressure cooker, trying to find houses, trying to get into school. So to the point where I was shipped off to live with my uncle for a few months so that he could settle me into a school. And in that time, my parents had decided, well, we weren't going to be living there because that's just where my uncle lives. So, I wouldn't wear a school uniform to school, and I'd stick out like a sore thumb. And of course, in school, in a civvy school, you're always picked on for your accents or for something being different. And, the kind of the feeling of being different, you could see that, people had different ways of thinking, different ways of being, if you like, and in comparison with what I knew, which was the community within the camps.
Well, within those first few years of you moving around, they're all minor transitions, what you had anyway. So
Yeah.
start off in Hanover, in Wiltshire, northeast of England,
Yeah.
Dortmund, you name it, they're all minor transitions, having to look at rebuilding new communities, making new friendships, relationships.
And Rich, really, it's matter of fact, is what I'm going to say at a certain age. For me, it was anyway. It was just what happened. You didn't really question it. And when you did, you may have been you were in that snowball effect that the community gave you in a way, because everybody was in the same boat. You didn't have anything to compare it with. When you're 6 or 7, you just don't have that comparison.
Yeah, well, that's your normal, isn't it?
Yes.
And I guess every new move is a new adventure for you anyway, because you're that young.
Yeah, it was pitched that way as well. So the way that my parents would pitch it, it was a new adventure. And I can recall a particular example of when we got to Germany. It was very dark, and we'd been doing the usual, 10-hour travel on a ferry and all the rest of it. And we got there, and I was quite excited, and I had this little money in my pocket, and I was probably around 7 or 8, and my father laughed at me and said, "You can't use that money here. We have Deutschmarks here." And I can remember my bubble bursting at that point, thinking, this is different. And previous to all the other moves, that didn't take place. So, there are little subtle things that happen during the course of those little years, I'm going to say, that you start to realize that things are going to be different.
You mentioned that one of the things about going to school in civilian school, that particular period where you were the odd one out because you couldn't wear the uniform because this was a temporary school, that there was a change in community there. Because I suppose one of the things that we talk about often is the things that you take for granted when you are in the military, that are shared values, shared expectations, the amount of things that are just known compared to the things that are unknown when you then become civilian again, because there are different rules and different expectations. And I suppose it's kind of like your experience of the military. Does that match that, or is that different in terms of that shared values? Was that part and parcel of that transition challenge?
Yeah, it was a massive challenge. Maybe not so much the values, because it's not really something you articulate inside at this point. I think when you get older, you do. But it's kind of like everybody else is in the same boat. And then you go to civvy school, and I can recall what in Wiltshire, one of my teachers asking me a question that was really easy, but I didn't understand him. His accent was different. And I just spouted out something that I think he might have said, and it was wrong. And I felt mortified. And I still remember that to this day. I feel mortified I got the question wrong. Just little subtle things. For example, seeing adults with long hair. Didn't see it in my world. And then suddenly I'm like 13 and I was seeing adults with long hair, men.
Is that, say men,
men. And just, the differences between the way people talk. So I was always in the civvy school pointed out, very particularly in one class I recall, in geography, actually, one of my favorite subjects, of course, because I was all right at that. And a teacher saying, "You say this word." So I said this particular word and I said it different to everybody else. And she was pointing out that it was actually quite an English way of saying it, if you like. And so you just got pointed out, not just by your own pupils and your peers, but by your teacher for being different. And I just don't think this day and age that would perhaps happen so much. But back when I was in the 70s and 80s, those sort of things would happen. They pick you out for the good. They see it as the good, but actually I was mortified.
Well, that's similar to must try harder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or can do better.
Yeah.
So I think when we were talking to you previously, Gwyneth, one of the things that was really interesting for us, because we talk a lot about patterns and the importance of patterns in our life, the importance of recognizing our patterns. And that was part, I suppose, of the conversation that really fascinated me was your patterns, how you were describing those, and almost that journey of recognition, of recognizing that there is a pattern there that relates to that upbringing within the military.
So if you imagine being born in a military cycle, and I say it's a cycle, a 2-year cycle, for example, and that 2-year cycle never stops until that day that your parent leaves the forces. In my case, my dad. And, there is no retrospection in this world that I live in. I didn't look back because looking back was painful. My coping strategies were just to go forward, keep going forward, and that's what I still do today. So I can move regularly. I move job regularly. I move all the time, location, and I continually change the furniture or the decorations in the house. And I see that as a pattern of like a lot of my peers who've been in the forces as well. So I see that as a pattern and we recognize that. But flip side is it makes other people unsettled around you. So my relationship with people, past relationships, past boyfriends, etc., it's very unsettling that you want to move or you want to do this because you're always yearning for that bit more. And you're trying to fill that emptiness that you have inside, because that emptiness is always there for me, that yearning for a community that doesn't really exist in the same way it did when I was growing up. It's here, but because I've got this DNA inbuilt, and I'm going to say it's a DNA because you're almost like you're born into it. It is like you're always yearning for more, even if it's staring you in the face.
Yeah.
That community.
I'm wondering, did you ever find out how your mother thought about the experience?
Unfortunately, not. No, my mum passed a few years ago, and I would love to have that conversation with her now. I do know that the experience for my mum was hard. So it was like being a single mum, but within a confines of the army barracks, and within that, then the different types of ranking and how you need to behave around certain people. Equally, my mum also had a child before me that died at 1 day old, and I would have loved to have that kind of conversation with her about her grieving process and how she managed that, because she was living in Germany and the grave is in Germany. And it's kind of like, I wish I'd asked a lot of questions. I have a lot more questions than I have answers, even today. And I'm in my 50s.
And I'd cycle back to that comment you made about community, about the fact that there's a yearning for something that's missing from the civilian community that you had within the military community. And it's almost like part of the normal that was left behind in the military. I'm really curious if you, having had the space now and starting to do that reflective piece, if you had to quantify what that missing piece was, is that something that you've been able to kind of go, actually, that's what it is? That's what made that different?
I think it's the same as a lot of service personnel would say. Even my dad, it'd be the bantering, because we brought your values of your family, your dad and mum, depend on who's serving, brings that into the family. So we got by laughing. We got by bantering. We got by being around people, our people, right? And that was the same for a child, for me. And I think that, if I talk to someone today, just out in the street, they don't get it. And I know that that's what service personnel have, and they have that, they have somewhere to go in their community to seek that out, ex-servicemen. We don't have ex-children, of service. And that, I think, is a big missing piece.
Is that maybe the part that stays constant? Because if it's the banter, it's the community, the almost like the everyday behaviours, no matter where your family is posted to or billeted at, actually all of that, it might be different people, but the behaviours, the banter, and the responses round about you, those are, you can almost predict what those will be. They're familiar.
Yeah. And no one gets offended. So, but you can't be as straight talking, forgive me, in civilian life. There is a way of being, in your professional life, in your personal life, even in relationships. So there is a level of understanding within that community that, some children get, some people. In my case, that was, I got that community, bantering, etc., but it seeped into the family, it leaked into the family, as well.
Well, that's kind of like so when I've applied for civil service jobs, there's a certain way they do want you to talk or behave in, so they show video of this particular pattern, whatever's going on in the workplace, and they expect you to answer in a certain way. Again,
behaviors and strengths, I think they call it. Yes. So they're looking for behaviors and strengths rather than.
And that can be quite confusing to people who had never come from that experience or background. So I guess that's what you're kind of saying, isn't it? There's all those other things that underline with what your experiences of life are, where when you're going into, say, the work environment, this is what is kind of expected of you. And it's trying to fit in with that.
Yeah, I think military children have a unique skill set. We talk about resilience and adapting and being able to change, et cetera. You take years to train someone in those sort of areas. And like I say, we could have a degree in that tomorrow. But there is the yin and the yang of that. There's the downside of being resilient. There's the downside of being adaptable and changeable in every way, shape, or form. For example, I love change. Absolutely adore change. If you give me change tomorrow, that I absolutely love. But that means shaking up my family, or shaking up something in the organization, to whatever that change might be, and it can take a lot of energy out of you.
Is this about context? Because I'm just thinking that sometimes if we are unclear about the context of things, whether that's in a work environment, a social relationship, a conversation, it can be really anxiety inducing, because there's lots of things that are unknown in terms of how do I respond, what's expected of me, and all of that is contextually driven. When you're within the military community, that context is always known. It's always known.
You're nail on the head there. I think you are accepted for who you are quite quickly. And then you have to adapt to be someone different when you leave. And it's not a transition, it's a drop dead date. Okay. So when my father moved out the army into he had a transition, I'm sure. I didn't. Yes. I got, boom, there you are, there's the new school. Make it what you will.
Yeah.
Okay. So
now they have likes of Op Courage, Op Nova, Op Fortitude, Op Prosper. Maybe that's time the government should be looking at Op Families or an equivalent thereof. So then they have that wraparound thing of going, families about to leave, we're all leaving as a oneer, and then this is where we're moving to. So then there's that fully integration bit with that family. So there's reduced stress. The children are more happy when they move out, where they go in, and the whole family is able to work together to maybe build a better future for themselves.
Yeah, I don't know how you plug those gaps. I don't think there's one size fits all, and I think it's very variable. I think had I been 7, I would have needed probably a little bit less of intervention than being 13 or 14. And I think there's how long is a piece of string. So putting that framework together would be quite a difficult and complex challenge. But I think that there is definitely gaps. Certainly when I was growing up, and I know it was a few decades ago when I left the forces, but it's still within me to this day. And no one's ever tracked me to see how I am, to see what I'm doing, whether my welfare's okay, whether there's any data insights they could get from someone like me. Or that's what I'm disappointed about, in regards to my own reflections and how I look at my unique skill set. And I am unique, There's very few of us in this in the UK that are like this, But I equally know that because of the downsides, we needed to be looking backwards to look forwards, but no one's doing it with me. I've had to do it all for myself.
Is that because as a military child, if your parent or parents leave the military and you do not go into that, it's almost like that child who becomes extra to the service rather than part and parcel of the delivery mechanism for the service. So therefore, it's almost kind of like that gets put to the side as not really part of the concern.
For what I can see, and I haven't done a lot of reading in regards to this, because all I can say is my experience. But what I can see, or what my experience has been, was left to my own devices. Now, that may have slightly changed, but it wouldn't go far enough. And I think it wouldn't go far enough because I don't see anyone saying, are you an ex-military service child? And, oh, great, we'll accept you into this employability, area where you've got unique skills that, we can train you up and do this, that, and the other, if we're looking that way. But equally, the emotional side and the physical wellness. For example, I'll give you an example. You've got military service personnel who often are homeless, and we can see a lot of that in the press at the moment. And there's a lot of focus on that. So they are looking at who's coming out and then ending up homeless, but they're not looking at who's coming out and ending up where. So is there someone like me who's struggled all their life, but not, I don't want to say it's all bad, but equally there could be someone who's had all bad and hasn't been tracked, where the intervention could have helped them discover themselves a bit more, or emotionally, and put a framework around those type of people who are perhaps less retrospective or less able to look at their own welfare. We don't know how many military children, for example, maybe commit suicide 10 years after leaving their community, or ending up with zero qualification, whatever. There's an awful lot of insights that we don't have. And we also don't do the successes either. And I think there's a balance to be struck here, where there's probably quite a lot of good success stories that we, children of today in the military probably need mentorships. And wouldn't it be great to highlight someone or a number of people that have had the same kind of start in life that is now doing something great?
Well, the veterans can get the label of mad, sad, and bad. And
right.
So it's got to be careful with labeling how the public will see people when they do leave that community, because you don't be labelled as like veteran, mad, sad, and bad, and lonely, depressed, post-traumatic stress disorder, and all that sort of stuff. So there needs to be, as you say, Gwyneth, that fine balance there of people need that more support, they get that more help and support. Yeah. And the people that need a little bit less, to get a little bit less somehow.
Yeah.
Can I come back to the context? Because I think this is really relevant. Because part and parcel of what Rich and I do in terms of supporting that emotional journey is teaching people how to navigate that lack of context. Giving them the tool set to establish context. Because it's really important. If you don't know the context of a situation, a relationship, a community, a scenario, how do you know what the right response is? If you're used to being in a place and an environment where no matter where you go, the context is a given and universal, then how are you expected to develop these skills? If you're brought up in civilian life where context is much more ambiguous, where relationships are much more variable, in terms of that, then you learn to establish context. You learn how to do that from quite an early age, so that by the time you're at early adulthood and into adulthood, these are established patterns you have. These are established parts of your skill set. But if you haven't had that experience and haven't had to do that as a child, because context is pretty stable, then as an adult, that makes that something that you maybe aren't even aware is something that is missing or that you struggle with. You just know that this isn't where I need to be, and you look for a context that you're familiar with that matches, so you keep moving to find it.
Absolutely. Yeah, spot on. And I think, we've got to remember, and this goes, a bit to the left field a bit, but we've got to try and remember that as parents for military children, that when we talk about home, because parents did, my parents certainly did, home was Wales, okay? Wales wasn't my home. I went there in the transition, but it wasn't my home. And in my mind, in my heart, although I'd been brought up to believe that, that was my parents' structure. That's what they were brought up in. That's what they knew. That's what they understood. And I often wonder if other parents do the same thing and say, we're going home, meaning they're going to see their parents in the place they used to live. And it never felt like that. I don't know what home feels like. And you accept that as you get older, that it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. It's just a house. It's just a location. And you learn to accept that. Some people may not. Some people learn home very, very quickly. But it's that whole kind of rhetoric and assumptions that are made to the children whilst they're growing up in the military, that my home is your home. My nationality is your nationality. Whatever you say on the British passport is what you are. I was brought up in Germany, okay? And my father was Welsh. So we used to stand there and obviously back in the day, it'd be God Save the Queen. And we would watch the parades go on, God Save the Queen. You get back to Wales, it's a very different scenario. And being Welsh means something very different to perhaps being Scottish and English. But this whole British, I was brought up British. I am British, not, even though I was born in Germany. And the worst question you could ever ask someone like me, if you haven't got time, is where are you from? Because you need half an hour. And then you might not get it, depending on who you are. Mm-hmm. So those sort of questions, there's real subtle differences between, me and the military child and perhaps, if I asked my father, where are you from? He'd say Wales. That's where he's from. He was brought up there. But it rolls down to you, but it's not really you. And your identity is not your parents' identity.
Yeah. Being a child. Yeah. So in a way, then you're effectively in no man's land, aren't you? So you haven't served, but you have lived with people who served. So you've had all the concerns and worries of, where's my dad going now? Is he going to be okay if he goes on tour or operations?
Yeah.
Is he going to come back okay? And all that sort of stuff. As well as then, when you do leave, what's my identity? And who am I as I'm leaving that environment, the whole community?
Yeah. Where's your accent from? Move every 2 years. Where's your accent from? It's the questions that are really hard to answer.
Well, especially if you're mixing with, say, Scots, people from Geordies, Welsh.
Which we all did in the army. They're there.
Yeah.
Boom. Yeah. It was a whole melting pot.
On because I was thinking I'm the only Scot here and I'm feeling quite isolated right
But there was a massive mixture, which was beautiful and diverse. And the thing is with military children, most military children, we get on with every culture. We don't, absolutely. One of the best things that come out is, I honestly get on with most people. I can talk to anyone, on any level. And I love that about myself. But I also recognize there's a yin and yang to that. Some people become wallflowers and don't talk to anyone because, of course, if they're introvert or whatever in their own little life. So what I want to do is just recognize that military children have that kind of very different way of viewing life to their parent, their grandparent, or other people who haven't been born in this society, if you like. Yeah.
Well, is that maybe again about where home is? So that home isn't a geographical location, it's a community.
Yes. There's no geographics, there's no boundaries, there's no borders. We live in an ideal, if you had an idyllic or an ideology, it would be us, because there's there's none of this kind of you're from here, I'm from there. The bantering goes on within the parents, children. It doesn't matter. That's what kids don't see that. I didn't see that. I saw it when I left because I was picked on for it. Not massively. It wasn't a big bullying, but it was noticeable. It was sublimable. It was that accent, the look, the way you dress is different. Even the food is different,
And have you got some recollection of how that affected you?
I think that it just accentuated my bullishness because I was a teenager at this point. So therefore, the rebel Gwyn came out. It didn't feel like I was going to be affected by it in any way, shape, or form. However, when I really looked deep down inside myself, it probably gave me a complex. But I think a lot of teenagers have complexes anyway. I've got a teenage son now. I know exactly what it means. But one thing I do look at when I look at my teenage son is the stability he has. And the fact that if I ever said, let's move here tomorrow, and that's what you're effectively doing to someone, you might gear them up. But if you were someone who had a stable upbringing and you rode around very nicely with a nice nucleus family till the age of 30, and then you were told for the next 10 years, you're going to move every 2 years. You're not going to be able to look back. And you can't phone anyone because, of course, social media wasn't around then. And I just want you to move forward. And we'll give you a moment's notice. How would that affect an adult? And I'd like to think that most adults most adults I know wouldn't thrive in that situation. It's a survival. This is not thriving. It's not all bad, but this is a survival coping mechanism, and probably, and I don't like to use the word lightly, but traumatizing. It's miniature traumas every time you move because you have to adapt, you have to change. And then what happens is you just numb what's going on or you don't look back because looking back can be quite painful. Not now, not in my 50s, but then in my, when I was 8, 9, 10, 11. So those miniature traumas make who you are today and build your values.
Well, they build your patterns as well, don't they? They build you build your responses. Some of those good, some of those not so good.
Yeah.
Some of the good, the resilience, the capacity for change, the ability to adapt. Some of the bad is almost the craving for change, the chasing of that community, of that conceptual home that is linked to a community that you are now not a part of.
Yeah. But it also can drive you crazy, Ali, because, it's not all been rainbows and unicorns. In my 20s, when your formation years of kind of trying to get out there, and I moved to London, I think I manifest myself in a controlled way of bulimia, partying too hard, going out, forgetting, not having friends and then really not hooking up with them again. They were there and now they're, I've moved on to the next friend or the next relationship. You just don't look at anything past the next day.
Pretty transient.
Yeah. Yes.
So you continue not looking back.
Yeah. Until it hits you hard, however that manifests. For me, it was bulimia. And for me, I went to a counsellor for 5 years to understand myself. And I took myself to a counsellor, not anyone specialist in military transitions, because, of course, I didn't know that then. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And it all came out within that counselling service. So, this is like my mid-20s at this point. Now, I might have been a late developer or I might not have been. But what I wish to say is that there needs to be some sort of, within the family unit, within the models that, the frameworks that people deploy, the charities, whatever it might be, there needs to be an element of take a deep breath. Let's see what we've just done. Now, my parents didn't have time for a deep breath. My dad was being deployed. My mum was looking after the kids and, the house, and making sure that the last house was clean and tidy before the handover, and moving the boxes and da-da-da-da-da. And there's just no time. There's no time for that real reflection. And I think children need reflection as well as adults. And we all know that reflection's a good thing for mental health, for well-being. But children don't get that privilege.
No.
They've not been taught.
Yeah. So we looked, doing our research for some other bits and bobs, we were looking at some papers, and one of the organisations we looked at, they recognised that their emotional model for children, or really for the entire family, is something like 20 years out of date.
Yeah.
So they recognise there is a problem with what's going on with those communities.
Well, it's almost like part of that transition is recognising where the skills gap is. Yes, there are some very, very unique skills that military children and military families develop, as you say, quite often because it's a necessity in that environment. But that also means that there are skills that they don't.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, where is the gap matching there that says, actually, in order for you to transition successfully now to the next phase, which is maybe a move into permanent civilian life, I now need to find a way to supplement that learning with these skills, because these will now be essential for you, because your experience to date hasn't given you access to that learning. So I need to deliver that for you now to enable the next phase. It's almost kind of like, yeah, well, I want you to go out and learn to drive a car, but I'm not going to give you any lessons. You're just going to have to figure it out on your own. It's like, well, driving a car is critical for my next phase of my life, then this is going to be tough.
Or you get given a IKEA flat pack thing and you go, what the hell is this?
without the instructions. Yeah. That's an often one anyway. But yeah, and you crash the car a couple of times and you have to get on and carry on rather than resolve what you've just done.
Or somebody going, oh, I see what's wrong. You were never taught to drive, were you? Well, come here and I'll show you how to drive.
Yeah.
And as we had a conversation with somebody else, weren't we, Ali? And she was saying is, don't signpost me to another bloody organisation. They're not helping. So you want organisations or something there to go, these can help you. Take that weight off your shoulders, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, though, is what happens then is when you crash the car, you end up getting treated for depression or anxiety or a whole host of other things. But nobody's taught you to drive the car yet.
No.
And that means that you might, in theory and on the surface, be at a point where you can move beyond that, whatever has caused that crash. But you still can't drive the car. And until somebody shows you and supports you to learn to drive the car, actually, that's when this becomes sustainable.
Yeah.
Because that plugs the gaps.
Yeah.
That's kind of why we started doing what we were doing, because that piece is missing.
Yeah, it is. I think that, we've got to recognise that children need a childhood, right? And it's not a military childhood. I'm not saying not be in the military. That's something that has to happen in terms of, the service personnel and what they do with their own families. But having a childhood where you're not judged and you are supported both outside of the military life and inside the military life, and learn about the wider perspectives of different types of communities, not just the one you're in. It might not mean anything to a 4-year-old, but it's certainly, as you start growing, there are things. Going to see your grandparents or your other family members for 1 week a year is not going to help you. It's got to be indoctrinated early on so that it's not such a shock to the system, where you have to get to a point where different things manifest themselves as you grow older. Whether that is, like I say, bulimia, or whether it's something else. And we don't know the something else. We don't know what we don't know, right? And that's the problem. That no one's asking the questions.
So that's why Gwyn, we did the podcast with Dr. Kim Bond, all about ACEs.
Yeah.
And what does that person want?
Yeah.
Rather than what the researchers want, not what the police want or the justice system.
No.
What does that person want to help deal with their situation?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I mean, for me, it would have just been stop. You know, I can see this pattern emerging here. And because I had to learn my patterns, I had to understand me. And it took a long time. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't a year. It wasn't even 2. And I'm still dealing with the patterns today, the moves, the furniture, I'm still having to put myself in check. And I probably will till the day I die because it's part of me. And I recognize that and I've resolved that. But during the 20s and my 30s, that makes everybody else around me unsettled.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of civvy people, right?
Yeah.
That you end up having relationships with or doing something different with. So without, I just wish that my big wish would be to be able to help military service children in the future not do or make mistakes that perhaps other military children have and haven't recognized it till later on. Doesn't mean that it's held me back, because I've utilized some of that strength that I had. I have resilience and my own scaffolding, my independence, fiercely independent, don't need anyone kind of attitude. But that's not good for your mental health. That's not good for, being conducive with other relationships and having right connections with people. That's almost like, don't come close. And that's the kind of aura I used to have. Don't come close. Don't be within my space of my emotional space, because that means I have to, you might not be around here next week in my mind. They're still here, but that's because they're persistent, not because I have been, sadly. But that really is the balance that I'd like people to understand, is the parents to understand that it's not the child's home and place. And if you want to build that, then there needs to be toolkits given to parents to be able to enable that to happen, as well as those connections later in life and how they are formed really matter. And without kind of striking people off very, very quickly in your own mind, which happens almost naturally.
You look at actually ACEs, it's adverse childhood experiences, but the really important word within that is experiences, because we model our behaviour on not only on the situation as it requires. A lot of that is adaptive in terms of what's going to keep me alive right now.
Yeah,
but also, what do I witness? What do I see? What do I observe? What do I hear? And that means then that if there's no need for something to be demonstrated to you in that setting, then you never get to observe it. You never get to model it, pattern it, try it on. And that comes back to those critical life skills, because you also see that with the service leavers who maybe have come from environments where they haven't had those patterns themselves. They join the military. The military gives them the community, the stability, the structure that has maybe been missing from their earlier life. But they still don't have the patterns, because they've got the solution, but they haven't got, you could say, the proof of concept of how I get from A to D, because they've gone straight from A to D and they haven't had to do the B and C in between to create that.
Yeah.
So again, that's that part of that transition issue, which means that if that's not addressed at some point, when are you going to learn that? Because at some point, this is going to be critical for you to feel stable, for you to feel safe, for you to feel grounded, for you to feel like you fit in. You have to learn to create that. And that is that critical part in that transition piece, is recognizing there are strengths of that military upbringing, but it has to be supplemented to give that rounded experience. So what parts are missing? What do you not get to see? What do you not get to model? How do we provide you the skill set there instead?
I think that's right. I'd extend it even further, though. I'd almost put it in the curriculum of some description. So it starts from the day what's a typical kind of serving years? I don't know. But from day one, that you can learn, i.e. school, perhaps it should be in there, because there is an element that, there's a transition of, I don't know, start, cut off date, 6 months, whatever it might be. But actually, we need to build in to the child's psyche early on in quotes, normality looks like.
Yeah, I do know now. Sorry, Gwyn, carry on.
Yeah, no worries. No, that's fine.
Yeah. No, I do know now that the government are really good at tracking the child's education career. Mm-hmm. So there's no, as you said, there's no reason why they couldn't implement something, put that within that system.
Yeah. So, back in my day, it'd be called social science. It's yeah.
I was just thinking about an apprenticeship program that helped design.
Or even mentorship programs. So there's other children who are in that school that they've been there a year or so. The new kids coming in, they can mentor that child as they come into that school and help them transition within that school. So they're understanding about that transition and building friendships, building networks.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. I think it goes beyond that. I honestly think that it's more than just school. I think when I say curriculum, it's teaching you the differences between the community they currently live in and the community they might go and live in. And it's not just, we've got the values in the army. There's certainly, my dad would have gone through, a training regime that would have instilled his values, which then fall patched on me, because that's what happens. But there's nothing for the child to have that kind of, I'm not an arm. I didn't sign up to the army. I did not sign up to the service. My dad did. But I almost have those badges, if you like, that my father got along the way, but without that kind of education or understanding, knowledge base of what that might mean for my future. Okay. So what I'm trying to say, it's not just, learning about, I don't know, the usual kind of social connections, et cetera, but really getting deep into the child's psyche in these communities where they are moved every 2 years, like international schools, where you kind of then, not just in a school environment where you've got a mentor and a buddy, but you're equipped to leave whatever date your dad or mum decide to leave the service. You are equipped to handle civilian life.
A lot of that is maybe also about the support structures that are put in place for those moves. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, part of that is sustaining friendships, sustaining relationships, how to build sustainability, even though the geography may change. Because that sustainment, that longer term investment is essential for that attachment later on in life. For the being able to trust and be vulnerable within that group. Actually, that's about sustainment of relationships. How you choose to sustain those, nourish those, and develop those over a longer period of time, because otherwise it's only going to have a finite lifespan and it becomes almost disposable. It's almost too easy to walk away because you haven't fully attached or committed within that, because the experience has taught you that what's the point? You're only going to be here for a limited point of time.
Yeah. So it's almost like, and you're also suppressing emotions around what that feels like. So you're just suppressing that. Whereas what I'm trying to say within that curriculum is you can express how you feel. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to have resentment. It's okay for not to like what's going on in your world. It's okay to not be okay. We all say that. But I didn't have that growing up. And I honestly, if that's, I will be blown away if you tell me that currently exists.
I'm not sure is the honest answer. I think there are pockets of that where different areas are looking at the emotional well-being and being able to express emotions, but whether they take it to the next phase, which is that element of, right, okay, so now what do you do with this? Now you've expressed it, now what do you do next? Yeah. How does this translate in terms of your boundaries, your values, your behaviors? How does that relate in terms of whether you want to sustain this relationship or whether this is something that you need to enforce something different within? or express something then, or there's a drama that you need to resolve. And it's those skill sets that then become super critical, is what do you do next?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you resolve the issue if it's not walking away?
Yeah. If we don't address those things, you become very empty inside, isolated, maybe. Not everybody, I'm not saying, but there's that portion of society, that community that I believe does, because nothing fills that void that's gone. You know, I went when I turned 11, we moved again. Godforsaken place. Bloody hated it. I had no friends. It was they ended up at a different camp to me, but I was hitting puberty, and and everything else, and my body was changing, and I felt so lonely. I couldn't talk to anyone. Had a new friend at school, kind of didn't trust her yet, and it was literally within days, and I found that one of my loneliest times, because there was just no one I could talk to that were my old friendship group, previous to the one before. And I just think that there's different levels, within that age range, puberty side, the kind of the transition side. There's the young, very young, where, they're born in this society and following what normal feels like. And I just hope that the children are not seen as resilient, and the terminology starts to change around this. That resilience and adaptability and changing and all those wonderful words that are put in report after report and research after research comes across very positive. And yes, some of it is, but there is always that flip side, which I haven't seen talked about or heard about or read about.
It's what was said earlier. It's that survival skills, isn't it?
Yeah.
You got to survive. You got to adapt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's coping strategy,
you cope.
ultimately. Yeah.
And you've got no way of questioning it, because it is your normal. You've got no comparison at that age. When you get to my age, you start to question it. You start to think, right, okay. So if I hadn't been brought up in the military, what would I look like now? Would I have stayed in one place? Oh, that feels like awful to me, but that's because of who I am today. But when you look at it and you look at my parents, they did stay in one place for a long time until they got to their 20s and then, went into the forces or whatever. And it's not all bad, but there is that element where I feel that when society talks around children in this space, what they forget is they are children, and we put labels on them as if we're adults. Because resilience in children, to me, is quite sad.
Well, childhood isn't just about your school grades. Childhood is about your life experiences and what those life experiences equip you for later on.
Yeah. I mean, fantastic fun, great community when you're in there during it, but think about the after, because there will be an after. And that's what I'd say, is that bonding, that community, that, that bantering, everything is wonderful, the education, but there is always that after. And that's when it hits you like a bulldozer.
And it's also that tracking afterwards is, what does the MOD or the Office of Veterans Affairs or whoever it comes under, how do they track the children of the service families, what they're up to, what they're getting on, how they're getting on?
Yeah. Oh, well, it's as simple as surveys and questionnaires, and starting somewhere would be good. My worry would be that it doesn't start at all.
Well, we're probably 20 years or so behind US, Canada, Australia, whoever else.
And that saddens me for the children's future.
But
I'd like them to learn from people like me.
These conversations will probably start that. Hopefully, they'll start that ball rolling.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got to have more conversations. We've got to have more conversations around the terminology, the independence talk, and about childhood in general and beyond. Because the childhood itself, I wouldn't say is a bad experience. It's the beyond bit that can be for some.
Well, it's about taking what is a really powerful experience and making it even better by recognising that there's some rounding of the edges we need to do to make this a complete picture.
Yeah.
That actually there's key components missing, and if we deliver this, then what we've got is unstoppable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you have to be fully equipped for whatever life throws at them, who can navigate the building of their own community, who can create that sense of home, who knows what that is and knows how to manage that context to be something that they want, who knows how to be in long-term relationships and manage those in sometimes very difficult situations and still stay within their own boundaries, their own values, be true to themselves, and has the vocabulary and the skill set to do so, has the experience to do so, and knows how to manage those outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, we've got to recognise this is quite an artificial setup, in terms of the community. It's artificial. You have your artificial aunties and your uncles, whilst you're in that childhood setting. You have an auntie that, happens to frequent the naffy with you, and auntie and all the rest of it. And then suddenly they're not your auntie anymore and you never see them again. It's all very artificial. And I think that's what we've got to recognise, is that kind of, that bubble then gets burst, and then moving towards the reality of life needs real delicate handling, depending on the child and their needs. I could say it's a broad brush. We all know how difficult schools are at the moment in terms of all the difficulties they've had after COVID, etc. So adding this into a civi school mix isn't the answer as an ultimate one thing. There's many other things that need to be looked at across the board.
They do have I know the name's changed, but the premium service provision.
Right.
So there's a fund for miniature children.
Right.
But that, again, it's how that pot of money is used. So I'm guessing a lot of schools would turn around and go, this benefits that child, but it benefits the whole as well.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, I could have a view on that one. But, just from my own experience.
There is that support there, but it's how it's used. And
yeah. Is it something like £300 per kid?
Not sure off the top of my head, but somewhere in that region, £300-400,
I think it's actually slightly more than that. I looked at that just recently, and the overall spend for the UK was something like 68 million on it.
Okay.
That's across the UK.
Yeah. Be good to know what happens there. I think the thing is, if it's been the recognition and the understanding of their requirements is key to this. So if the recognition is by money, because it's not always money that you need, that's great. But the understanding and what the requirements are for a military child's new life in the civilian world, I'd be really happy to see that and see what is understood and what insights we have in regards to military children's way of living and how and what support they really need. Because often I read about education. Of course, that's really, really, really important. I wouldn't want to dilute that at all. And the education is super important. In different nations, again, you end up going from, an army school to a civi school, and the curriculum's completely different. Or one day you're learning French and the next day it's not on the curriculum and you've got to learn Spanish or whatever it might be. But in the main, that is really important. But it's the whole 360-degree view of this.
Yeah.
Which is the social connections, the real need to understand the identity of oneself, whatever that looks like. Because, my identity will be different from the next military service child's identity. It's not my parents. It's not a default. That's not my default. My flag flying of the UK is not my default. Those sort of things. They you unpick that kind of thing as you grow older, and you think, is that really what I'm about? Or was that what they were about and I ended up being?
Yeah. So if you had to pick one thing that you would like to see changed in terms of provision for service children, where would you want that time and effort to be invested? Gwyneth?
I'd like to think that it was in the transition phase. I'd like it to be a long time. It's not a transition with a start and end date within a 6-month time frame. I think the transition starts the day they're born in that service, because it ends somewhere along the line. They haven't signed up 25 years or whatever the years might be, 9 years, 6 years, 3 years. You signed up for that, parent, thank you. But start when they're born.
Well, then that also probably goes with giving the parents the skills as well.
Absolutely. Toolkit for parents, how you discuss these things. My parents weren't equipped. They're lovely, gorgeous people, but they weren't equipped to deal with us because they had so much else to deal with. And I would imagine the pressure on moving and the pressure on the service personnel and the one that's left to, deal with, the homely stuff, if you like. That there's so many different dynamics going on. Everybody's just surviving in that moment, especially when they're moving out of the forces, when they don't know if they've got a job, where they don't know where the house is going to come from, where they don't know whether they're going to get into the nearest school, whether the school's any good, whether you've got family nearby or haven't, and you don't know anyone. Everybody's moved on from, even if you went back to your homeland and your home place, that everybody else has got their own lives now. After that particular amount of time. So you're just literally starting again. So the last thing you probably are thinking, and the first thing is your children. The first thing is, let's get through this, but not the kind of the things that we've talked about today, which is, your terminology, the fact that, they'll be all right. They'll be all right. They will be for now because they want to please you. All children want to please their parents, right? All children want to be a chameleon, no one wants to stand out and be different.
Yeah. Those contextual skills, isn't it? The longer term social skills, the relationship building, the community building, those parts.
So when your parents are really focused on that, what you as a child focused on, you don't want to be adding to their load.
No.
You might not even know how to add to their load if you're young, really young, but you've still already got that DNA, I'm going to call it DNA, inside you, which is that moving, that change, that, idea of yourself within that community and how tight-knit it was, what that family looked like for you. Suddenly that family looks different. That area looks different. When I moved, it was like everything felt grey because we came from Germany, had pretty decent summers, and we went to Wales. Everything felt grey, and so my mood was grey.
Wet.
Yeah, and wet. Yeah. I love it. It's green as well. But at that time, I absolutely loathed it because my world had gone upside down and inside out, not because of the location, not because of the country, not because of anything, because of the way I looked at the world at that time. The way I looked at that world is someone took everything away from me, uprooted me like a seedling, uprooted again and again and again, and I wasn't allowed to plant. Finally, they said plant, and I didn't like it.
Well,
I didn't like it.
Dandelion blowing in the wind, aren't you?
Yes. Yes, the dandelion. Yeah. But, I'd like to think that most dandelions in this space could literally fall and start planting.
Yeah,
but
just drift around in the breeze.
Yeah, rather than being dragged into the breeze. Yeah, and you've got no control over it. You have no control over the fact that your parent is going to move. and the army have said you're posted here, there, and everywhere. So it's a conversation that's closed because it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, well, to a certain extent, that's stopped a bit now because obviously Germany's not there anymore, is it?
Yeah.
So there's a few less postings, but yeah, it's still right.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering then, Gwyn.
Yeah.
What key points or takeaways have you got for anybody listening?
I would say if you've got children, to think about it in the wider context, and from what we've talked about today, is really think about it from in their shoes, not your own. So in part, making sure that don't make assumptions about how they feel or think. They don't think in the same way as you, so your home is not their home. And I think in terms of the wider society point of view, I think it's making sure that we build in somewhere a real reflection on what's just happened so that things can be unraveled and resolved before the next steps. I think those two things would make a bit of a difference. And then, open it up to the world in terms of trying to build a better place for those children as they move forward into adulthood. Yeah.
Well, as Johnny Mercer says, is they want to build a country that's the best in the world for veterans. Says there's no reason why they can't build the best one in the world for service families.
Yeah, why not? Good at everything else.
I think
why not? I mean, if you can track lots of other things, you can definitely track your children. Yeah. You know where they are.
Well, isn't that also about recognising that in some way the family serves too? They're also veterans of the military.
In fact, yeah, my dad got the medals, but my mum should have had all the medals. Yeah, and certainly some of us kids too. We just got certificates.
Stamps and passports.
Yeah, lots of stamps in passports at one point and lots of ferry journeys.
Thank you very much, Gwyneth. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I hope you got something from it.
No doubt we shall speak again soon.
Yeah, hope so. Thanks.